Modern Warfare 2 has finally been released, so today I'm going over the best controller settings to use. And we're starting with arguably one of the most important controller settings, and that's the button layout. You may have noticed already in Modern Warfare 2 that slide cancelling is no longer the main movement mechanic, and although some people did find a workaround for it in the beta, it's not working at the moment, and Call of Duty have made it very clear that they don't want it to be involved in Modern Warfare 2 and Warzone 2. That being said, drop-shotting is still a major component of winning gunfights, and of course we still have the diving and sliding mechanic overall. But I think the meta movement mechanic, if you like, is going to be jump-shotting or bunny hopping. So I know many of you were using just the tactical button layout because it was easiest to either drop shot or slide cancel previously, and if you do want to focus just on the jumping and bunny hopping mechanic, you can use stick and move, since with this button layout you can jump by clicking in your right analog, so you don't have to move any of your fingers off the controls, but you still can have pretty decent movement. If you have seen settings videos of mine before though, you know that I highly recommend using bumper jumper tactical. So if you have just a standard controller, this button layout allows you to do every single bit of movement that you need to use, but without having to take your fingers off the analogs. Now usually you can only do this with a paddled controller or if you play claw. But here, as you can see, you can do your sliding and drop shotting by clicking in the right analog, but you can also do your jumping and mantling and bunny hopping by using the left bumper or L1 on PlayStation controllers. This means that your melee is now B or circle on PlayStation, and using your tactical equipment is now A or X on PlayStation. So it does take a little bit of getting used to, but it ensures you have the full range of movements that you need to get the upper hand when playing multiplayer, but without sacrificing your aim. So that's my recommendation for the button layout, and if you want to go that one step further of getting an advantage, you can actually flip your triggers and your bumpers. So you might think, why should I bother doing this? Well, arguably the most important part of your buttons is aiming in and shooting, as ultimately this is the bit that actually kills the opponent. And by transferring that from the triggers to the bumpers, you can actually do it milliseconds quicker each time. You no longer have to wait for the trigger to go all the way down to either aim or shoot. The button is just much more responsive. Next up, we have controller vibration. That is very much a personal choice, but I like to turn it off just because it is a little bit of distraction sometimes. Speaking of personal choice, we're now onto stick sensitivity, and I run 6.6 on these. There is no right answer here, or a number I can tell you and you'll immediately be amazing. Generally though, my advice is to try and run a sensitivity as high as you can go before you start missing shots. Because having the ability to swing around very quickly and aim at enemies or just maneuver around the map is absolutely an advantage, but it's only an advantage if you can actually aim in and kill people still. There's always someone in the comments that can somehow run on 2020. If that is you, by the way, drop a comment because I'm always intrigued by people like that. But for most mere mortals, it's under 10, and generally around 7 and 8 is the maximum for the average player. If you do start to miss shots though, or maybe you don't play as often, you can either put your stick sensitivity down, or as you can see here, we have the ADS sensitivity multiplier, and you can put this down. So I haven't altered this yet, but I usually do run 0.80. This setting is exactly what it says. So it's the sensitivity when you're actually aiming in. So if you did put up your normal sensitivity on your sticks very high to say, I don't know, 14, but you couldn't hit your shots, you could just move this down a little bit, as then when you're aiming in, it's much slower. It's definitely something to try out. I think if you're currently running your ADS sensitivity multiplier on 1 and you want to improve your sensitivity overall, I'd say put up your stick sensitivity for your analogs and then put down your ADS sensitivity multiplier. Those two things will balance out, but you'll just be much quicker around the map. Then we also have sensitivity multipliers for vehicles. This isn't too important, so I've left all mine on 1, and I'm going to skip the vertical aim axis settings, as basically you can invert them if you want, but I really think for most people that isn't necessary. For aim down sight behavior, leave it on hold. For automatic sprint, we absolutely want that on, and we want it on automatic tactical sprint. This makes it so as soon as you press forward on your left analog to move forward, if you have tactical sprint available kill, you will go straight into your tactical sprint rather than having the delay of actually clicking it in. This often can be the difference between life and death if you need to dip behind a doorway or something if someone starts shooting you. And in general, it's just a much faster way of moving around the map. Then we've got some other settings here which don't matter too much, and generally the default is good enough. But then we get down to interact and reload behavior. If you've been playing Warzone, you know that this is a very important setting to make either looting quicker or reloading more intuitive. Thankfully now we don't just have the tap to reload or tap to interact settings, we also have prioritize settings. So as it says here, you can prioritize interaction if at the same time you have reloading available and interaction available, or you can prioritize reloading. For me, I'm going to use prioritize reload, and I think that'll be best for most of you. This is great for a couple of reasons. One, it's actually much quicker to reload if you just tap rather than have to hold on to X. And two, if you've been playing Call of Duty for a long time, this is just way more intuitive. I mean, I still have friends who jump out of choppers by accident when they just want to reload their weapon when they're playing Warzone. So if there's a bunch of bodies on the floor and there's weapons scattered around and you want to reload, with this setting, you can just reload very quickly. So that's everything for the standard controller settings, but we also have advanced settings. And there's a few more things on here which are very important to get the upper hand on people. So of course on controller, we do have aim assist settings. You absolutely want to keep this enabled, and the type is very much up to you. I actually find that default is great for multiplayer maps when they're a bit smaller. On Warzone, it can be a different story, and I've made a whole different video based on that, which I'll link in the description if you are interested. But for now, Modern Warfare 2 multiplayer, default is just fine. For aim response curve, again, for most people, standard is going to be great, but actually I run dynamic, and this just allows slightly quicker movement in the initial phase when moving your analog before slowing down. So it's great for rushing people and SMG play on the whole. Again, I have made another video on this that goes into deeper detail, but for now I am running dynamic for those reasons. I do want to add that linear is great, as basically this moves your aim on the screen in direct relation to how much you actually move your analog. And I know that most people think standard should actually do that. So if you do want a pure aim in response to what you're pressing on your controller, linear is going to be best for you. And then for this ADS aim assist setting, that's only available in single player. So here we have another ADS sensitivity multiplier, and you're probably thinking, what is the difference between this and the one in the standard controller settings? Well, this is for when we're focusing, i.e. holding our breath with a scope. So for example, when we're sniping, we might want our aim to move slower than when we're just aiming around with a normal SMG or assault rifle. And altering this setting is actually based on whatever our standard ADS sensitivity multiplier is. So earlier I put mine at 0.8, so if we leave this at 1 here, that's actually 0.8 overall, if you know what I mean. But when we start moving this down slightly, that's actually lower than the 0.8 of our standard controller ADS sensitivity multiplier. I hope that makes sense, and sometimes it sounds a bit pedantic going to this level of detail in the settings, but honestly they can make a huge difference. We also have this ADS sensitivity transition timing, and you want this as the default, which is instant. I think gradual or after zoom can make it seem quite theatrical and cinematic, and maybe that's good when you're playing campaign, but in multiplayer when things are hitting you thick and fast, you want to be able to alter your aim instantly. And then if you really want to, you can customize your sensitivity per zoom. This is a great option, especially if you do mess around with your optics and you're a sniper person. For me though, I think just the overall sensitivity multipliers are just fine. And now we're onto the input dead zones. If you've seen my settings videos before, you know I always recommend putting the stick minimum on basically as low as you can go before you start getting stick drift. And by stick drift, I mean when you're not touching your controller, but your aim starts to drift. If it does start to drift, just put it up by 1 and then go back into the game, see if it drifts. If it doesn't, that's great, that's your new dead zone setting, but if it does, just keep going up by 1 and then keep doing that until it stops. And the reason you want this as low as you can go without stick drift is that when you move your analog, ideally, you want a response on the screen as fast as possible. If you put your dead zone really high, you're going to get a slower response on the screen. The maximums we can leave as they are, and then for triggers, we want this pretty low as well, as again, you just want a fast response on the screen. And this is part of the reason why people flip their button layout settings like I mentioned earlier, where they use their bumpers instead of the triggers. They just want a faster response. So for me, I'm going to put it down to 0.07 for each. And now we're on to movement behaviors. Here we've got some pretty important mantle settings, which you may want to pay attention to. For grounded mantle, you want to leave on. This just means you can climb up on things or over things in just one click, rather than have to do it twice. Thankfully now though, we do have this very handy setting in the automatic airborne mantle. So the default is partial, where you automatically mantle only if it prevents a fall. Previously, you could only have it on or off, and it was pretty annoying when you'd accidentally keep jumping up things all the time. Then we have automatic ground mantle. Absolutely leave this off. You don't want to start jumping over things and vaulting around just by running up to them. Then the rest of these settings here are completely subjective and up to you. They're not going to make a huge difference in the game. And to be honest, the default usually works just fine. So they're the best controller settings for playing Modern Warfare 2. I hope they've been helpful, and if you do want to know the best console graphics settings for Modern Warfare 2, be sure to head over to this video.